That's so cool, though, that design thinking is so universal.
It is.
It's human-centered, you know?
Yeah, so what is design thinking? Well,
Okay.
this first question.
This document kind of defines it as using a designer's tools and mindset to solve problems.
Okay.
And I think it really means finding solutions that consider people's needs.
Right.
And what's possible with technology, but also, like, what are the goals of a business or an organization?
So it's bringing those worlds together.
Exactly.
Not just about making something look pretty.
No. It's about function and form.
Yeah.
And it's about really understanding what people need and
Right.
using technology to serve that.
Okay. This source outlines 5 steps for the design thinking process.
Okay.
Empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test.
I love that breakdown.
Yeah.
Empathize being the first one.
Yeah.
That's about really getting to know who you're designing for.
Putting yourself in their shoes.
Exactly. Like even their frustrations.
Yeah, you're not assuming you know what they want.
You're not assuming.
You're really trying to understand.
Yeah.
I like that. And then define.
Okay, so define is about using all of that understanding from the empathize phase to really pinpoint the problem
Okay.
that you're trying to solve.
So it's going from kind of a vague sense of like something's wrong to a laser focus on what that is.
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, cool. And then ideate.
That's where we get to be creative.
Okay.
That's where we brainstorm all the possible solutions.
No idea is too crazy.
No idea is too crazy. It's about quantity over quality at that point.
You're encouraging that out-of-the-box thinking.
Yes. And then we move on to prototype, which is taking an idea and giving it some sort of tangible form.
So bringing it to life.
Bringing it to life even if it's a rough draft.
Right, so you can see how it might work.
Exactly. And that leads us to test,
Okay.
where you're putting that prototype in front of your user and getting feedback from them.
I like that. So you get to see what works and what doesn't.
Exactly.
And it sounds really structured and step-by-step.
Right.
But the source says that design thinking isn't actually linear.
It's not, and that's really important to note because it makes it seem more approachable.
Yeah.
It can feel less intimidating.
Like a journey.
Yes, like a journey with detours and shortcuts.
Oh, I like that.
You might revisit earlier stages based on what you learn.
Yeah, so you're constantly kind of going back and reevaluating.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's a more realistic way to approach problem solving anyway.
I agree. So the source talks about these 2 types of thinking that are essential in design thinking.
Yes.
Convergent and divergent thinking. Can you explain the difference?
Yeah, so divergent thinking is all about expanding your perspective,
Right.
exploring a wide range of ideas.
It's like brainstorming on steroids.
Totally, like pushing those boundaries of possibility.
Yeah.
And then convergent thinking is where you're starting to narrow those options down,
Okay.
focusing on what are the best solutions, refining them, getting specific.
So you're going from this wide open field to like a focused path.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So yeah, divergent thinking is expansive, convergent is focused.
And the source even gives a little history lesson here,
Oh yeah.
mentioning Joy Paul Guilford.
Yeah, a researcher who really introduced these concepts back in the 50s.
So these ideas have been around for a while.
Yeah.
But design thinking has kind of brought them to the forefront.
In a very practical way.
I'm curious, what kind of problems is design thinking particularly good at solving?
I think that's a great question, and I think this document really talks about what they call wicked problems.
Wicked problems.
Yeah.
Like wicked,
Like the big, messy problems.
that are really hard to solve.
Yeah, and I think the example they give is poverty or climate change.
Like big,
Huge. Exactly. And so I think design thinking with that human-centered approach is really well-suited to solving those problems.
Yeah, I could see how like understanding people's needs and finding creative solutions could be really helpful.
Totally.
In those situations, does the source give any real-world examples?
It does. It mentions using design thinking to improve diagnosis processes in healthcare.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So like understanding the patient experience,
Right. And streamlining those processes.
finding ways to make things more efficient.
Yeah. And more human-centered.
I like that it really shows how design thinking can be used to make improvements in people's lives.
Yes.
Something else that really stood out to me in the source is the concept of empathy.
Oh, yeah.
It seems to be a key element in the design thinking process.
It's like the heart of human-centered design.
Yeah, why is that?
Because it's about really understanding and sharing the feelings of another person.
So you can see the world through their eyes.
Exactly. And you can truly understand their needs, and you're not just assuming you know what they need.
Yeah. Going beyond assumptions and really connecting on that human level.
And the source also mentions empathy maps,
Okay.
which is a really interesting concept as well.
What are those?
So you can think of it like a visual representation of everything you learn about your user, their thoughts, their feelings, their pain points, even their behaviors.
So if I'm designing like a recipe app,
Okay.
an empathy map could help me understand like the frustrations that home cooks experience,
Yeah.
like finding recipes that fit their dietary needs or struggling to follow instructions.
Yes, exactly. And it helps your whole team get on the same page.
So everyone's working from that same understanding of the user.
Exactly. And the document also distinguishes between emotional empathy
Okay.
and cognitive empathy.
So emotional empathy is about feeling what others feel.
Yes,
Cognitive empathy is about understanding how they experience the world.
exactly.
So you might not have experienced the same thing,
Right.
but you're trying to understand their perspective.
And the document mentions that cognitive empathy can be tricky sometimes because we don't have a personal experience to draw on.
Yeah.
So it can be easy to misunderstand things. So the source suggests some specific methods for practicing empathy.
Okay, I want to hear about these methods.
Okay. So one is called shadowing,
Okay.
where you're observing users in their natural environment without interfering.
Oh, I actually did something like that when I was redesigning my website.
Yeah, huh?
I had some friends try to navigate it while I watched them.
That's a great
It
example.
was so interesting to see how their thought processes were different from mine.
Yeah, because you're seeing how people actually use the product or the service.
Right.
Another method is interviews, where you're having those open-ended conversations with users, really trying to dig deeper into their needs and motivations.
So shadowing is more about observing, and interviews are about asking questions,
Exactly.
trying to understand why people do what they do.
Yes, and then there are cultural probes, which are more immersive exercises where you might actually try to experience a task or situation as the user would.
That sounds intense.
It is.
So like using a wheelchair for a day
Yes, or navigating a website with a screen reader.
to see what that experience is actually like.
Yes.
I can see how that would give you some really valuable insights.
Absolutely. And then, of course, we have those empathy maps again,
Yeah.
which are really helpful for capturing and sharing all the insights you gain from those empathy exercises.
So it's like a cheat sheet
Yes.
for understanding your user.
I love that.
I'm starting to see how all of this fits together.
Uh-huh.
So design thinking is about creating solutions that are tailored to user needs, and understanding those needs deeply through empathy
Yes,
is so important.
it is.
And that's what makes this deep dive so valuable.
Yeah.
You're getting a solid understanding of these design thinking principles
Right.
and how important empathy is.
I think so. What stands out to you the most?
I think what's really striking me is how design thinking isn't just about designing products or services.
Yeah.
It's really a mindset, a way of approaching problems.
Yes.
And it can be applied to all sorts of challenges.
Right.
It's so relevant today because the world is changing so rapidly.
Yes.
We need these flexible and adaptable ways of thinking.
Totally.
And design thinking really provides that.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm excited to dive even deeper.
Let's do it. So, building on what we were just talking about, this document goes into how design thinking can help businesses not just survive, but thrive in this world that's constantly changing.
Yeah, there's so much talk about disruption these days.
Right.
It feels like the only constant is change.
Exactly. And this source uses this acronym,
Okay.
VUCA,
VUCA.
which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
VUCA sounds like a monster you'd fight in a video game.
I know.
But I get it. It's like trying to describe how unpredictable things are.
It really is. And the point the document makes is that those traditional business models
Right.
that are often like rigid and slow moving,
Uh-huh.
they just don't work in a VUCA environment.
So you need a different approach, one that embraces change
Yes.
and uncertainty.
Exactly.
So is that where design thinking comes in?
I think so. Design thinking encourages experimentation,
Okay.
iteration, and this willingness to learn from mistakes.
It's about being agile,
Yes.
adapting quickly,
Right.
instead of trying to predict the future.
Because who can do that?
Nobody.
Right.
So it's like riding the wave instead of getting wiped out.
I love that.
The source talks about how design thinking can benefit businesses in a few key ways.
Okay.
What are some of those?
One is identifying new opportunities by focusing on user needs and those emerging trends that we were talking about.
Yeah.
You can uncover all this hidden potential and create these innovative products and services.
So using empathy as a radar to detect what's coming over the horizon.
Yes.
You're anticipating what people will need in the future.
Exactly. And design thinking can also help improve existing products or services.
Okay.
Think about constantly gathering user feedback and
Yeah.
making these small but meaningful tweaks.
It's all about that continuous improvement,
It is.
never settling for good enough.
Right.
And design thinking can also help to create a more positive customer experience.
Totally.
So by thinking about the whole customer journey, from
Yes.
the first interaction all the way
The
through,
entire
you can
experience.
foster loyalty and make people feel good about choosing your brand.
Exactly. It's not just about the product itself.
Yeah.
It's about the whole ecosystem.
And that brings us back to empathy again.
Yes.
The more you understand your customers,
Right.
the better you can create experiences that resonate with them.
Exactly.
This source also mentioned a couple other concepts that I found interesting.
Okay.
Agile management and design sprints.
Yeah, so agile is really a way to manage projects and product development,
Okay.
and it prioritizes flexibility and constant feedback.
So it's like design thinking, but applied to how you get work done.
That's a good way to think about it. And these agile methodologies like Scrum,
Yeah.
they break projects down into smaller chunks
Uh-huh.
and prioritize responding to change
Okay.
over following a rigid plan.
Because things never go according to plan,
Never.
right?
Exactly.
So how about design sprints?
Okay, so design sprints are a method for quickly testing and prototyping ideas.
Okay.
And in fact, Google Ventures published a whole guide to them back in 2016.
So you're going from idea to prototype in just a few days.
Yes, it's super focused, very intensive.
Like a pressure cooker for innovation.
Yes,
So
exactly.
you bring a team together.
Uh-huh. And they brainstorm,
Okay.
they prototype,
Right.
and they test the solution to a specific problem.
That sounds really effective.
It is incredibly effective because it forces you to focus and make decisions.
Make quick decisions.
Yeah, and get feedback quickly.
From users.
From users.
Okay, now going back to that design thinking layout dash 2.pdf document.
Yes.
There's a section on the value proposition canvas.
Yeah.
What is that all about?
Okay, so it's a tool for businesses to make sure their products or services are really aligned with customer needs.
I'm intrigued. Break it down for me.
Okay, so picture a diagram with two sides.
Okay.
On one side, you have the customer profile,
Okay.
and this is where you outline the jobs the customer is trying to get done,
Okay.
the pains they're experiencing, and the gains they're hoping to achieve.
So jobs are like the tasks they're trying to accomplish.
Uh-huh.
Pains are the problems or obstacles.
Yes,
And gains are the positive outcomes
you got it.
they're looking for.
And then on the other side of the canvas, you have the value map.
Okay.
And this is where you describe your product or service
Okay.
and how it addresses those customer jobs, pains, and gains.
It's like a matchmaking tool
Yes,
for products and customers.
a perfect analogy.
You're finding that sweet spot
You are.
between what the customer wants and what you offer.
Exactly. And so the value proposition canvas helps businesses really clarify their value proposition
Okay.
and make sure they're building something that really resonates with their target audience.
The source also mentioned the lean canvas. Is that similar?
It is. It's kind of a broader business planning tool.
Oh.
It actually incorporates the value proposition canvas,
Uh-huh.
but it adds in things like the problem, the solution key metrics channels.
So it's like a one-page business plan.
Exactly. A snapshot of your whole business model.
How does this connect back to design thinking?
Well, both the value proposition canvas and the lean canvas are rooted in those design thinking principles we've been talking about.
Right. So they emphasize understanding customer needs,
Yes.
testing assumptions, iterating on solutions.
Exactly. They're practical tools for putting those design thinking concepts into action
I like that.
and making sure you're creating something that's desirable,
Yeah.
feasible,
Uh,
and viable.
Okay, cool.
So one more concept the document explores is framing.
Framing. I like
Yeah.
that word.
And the idea is that designers sometimes need to reframe a problem or a challenge in order to find the best solutions.
Can you give me an example of what that looks like?
Yeah, so imagine you're designing a new public transportation system.
Okay.
If you frame the problem as how to get people from point A to point B faster,
Okay.
you might end up just like adding more subway lines or more buses.
Makes sense.
But what if you reframe the problem as how to make public transportation more enjoyable?
Okay.
Now you're thinking about solutions like comfortable seating entertainment options or even the overall aesthetic of the system.
That's a great example. It shows how framing the problem differently can lead to totally different solutions.
Exactly. And the document suggests that designers use framing in a few different ways.
Okay.
First, it can help to clarify the problem by breaking it down into smaller, more manageable pieces.
So it's like zooming in and out on a map.
Yes, exactly. And it can also help you identify opportunities that you might have missed.
By looking at it from a new perspective.
Right. And finally, it can help engage stakeholders by presenting the problem in a way that resonates with them.
So it's not just about finding the right solution,
Right.
but it's about bringing people along on that journey.
It is. And the document actually gives a helpful framework for approaching framing.
Oh, cool.
It encourages designers to ask key questions like, what's the problem we're really trying to solve?
Okay.
Who are the key players?
Uh-huh.
What are their needs and goals? What are the limitations and opportunities? And what's the desired outcome?
So asking those questions to really get to the heart of the matter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And once you have a clear understanding of the problem and its context,
Yeah.
you can explore different frames and see how they might influence the solutions you generate.
So design thinking is like a meta skill.
I love that.
It's thinking about thinking.
It is being intentional and thoughtful in your approach.
Speaking of intentional approaches,
Yes.
this document provides some really practical guidance on actually running a design thinking project. It breaks the process down into 5 sectors.
Okay.
Empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and feedback.
Yes, and I think these really align with those 5 steps we discussed earlier.
They do.
But the document emphasizes that each sector should have very specific goals and deliverables.
So for example, during the empathize sector,
Yes.
the goal is to really understand the user,
Yes,
their
right.
needs, desires, and experiences.
Right, and then in define, you use that understanding to
Right.
craft a clear problem statement.
So moving from that fuzzy idea to a sharp focus,
Exactly.
and then ideate,
Let those creative juices flow.
brainstorm all the possible solutions.
Even the crazy ones.
So embracing that divergent thinking,
Totally.
and then prototype.
Making those ideas real, even if it's with rough sketches or models.
Yeah, so you can gather feedback and make improvements before investing too much time.
Yes. And finally, feedback.
Putting it in front of users and seeing how they react.
Right, because feedback is crucial. It helps you understand what's working, what's not working, what needs to be adjusted.
This framework is so well structured.
It is.
Really feels like a roadmap
It does.
for tackling complex challenges.
It's very human-centered,
I like that.
and it can be applied to all sorts of problems.
It's a versatile toolkit.
It is.
The document also stresses the importance of documentation.
Oh, yes.
All the project managers out there are cheering right now.
Yes, documentation is crucial for capturing insights, tracking progress, and communicating effectively.
It's like a trail of breadcrumbs
Yes.
to follow as you navigate this messy world.
And speaking of messy,
Oh.
the document reminds us about the importance of iteration and learning from failure.
We're so conditioned to think of failure as a bad thing.
I know.
But in design thinking, it's just part of the process.
Exactly. The document talks about a fail fast, learn fast mentality.
So you're using failure as a stepping stone.
Exactly. The quicker you test your ideas and get feedback, the faster you can make improvements.
I love that.
And I think that's one of the reasons why design thinking is so effective.
It encourages experimentation and growth.
It does.
And that's what true innovation is all about.
Yes, trying new things, learning from your mistakes, and always striving to create better solutions.
That's a great point.
Now, as with any methodology, design thinking also comes with its challenges.
Challenges, huh? I guess no approach is perfect. So what kinds of things does the document mention?
Well, one is data overload. In today's digital world, we are just drowning in information.
Yeah, it's like drinking from a fire hose.
It is, and it can be so overwhelming to try to sift through all of that data and find the insights that actually matter.
So it's not just about gathering as much data as you can.
No.
It's about being strategic.
Exactly, and this goes back to the importance of framing.
Right.
By asking those right questions, you can avoid getting bogged down.
That makes sense. What other challenges does the document talk about?
Another one that comes up is what they call conceptual drift.
Conceptual drift.
Yeah.
What is that?
It refers to how the problem you're tackling might actually shift or evolve as you gather more information.
So it's like you're aiming at a target, but the target keeps moving.
Yes, exactly. And it can be super frustrating, especially if you've already invested a lot of time and energy.
So how do you deal with that?
The document really emphasizes the importance of flexibility and adaptability.
Okay.
It's about being willing to adjust your course as you learn more.
So you got to be ready to pivot.
Yeah, it all comes back to that iterative nature of design thinking. It's not a straight line.
Right.
It's a cycle.
So data overload and conceptual drift, those are some pretty big challenges.
They are.
Are there any others?
One more that's worth mentioning is that it can be difficult to measure the success of a design thinking project.
Yeah, because you're often dealing with intangible benefits.
your like improved user experience or a more innovative culture.
Right, and those can be hard to quantify,
They can, and this can make it hard to prove the value of design thinking.
especially to stakeholders who are focused on the bottom line. So how do you convince those stakeholders that it's a worthwhile investment?
Well, the document suggests focusing on the long-term benefits,
Okay.
talking about things like increased customer loyalty, stronger brand reputation, creating a more innovative and adaptable organization.
So painting that big picture.
Yes, showing how design thinking can create lasting positive change.
Show don't tell.
Exactly, and it really helps to showcase that value through stories and case studies.
Real world examples?
Yes, things that resonate with people and finding those internal champions who really believe in design thinking.
People who can advocate for it.
Exactly, and help to build that culture where it can thrive.
It's like a grassroots movement for innovation.
I love that. And finally, there's the challenge of actually integrating design thinking with other existing systems and processes.
It's got to become part of the company culture.
It's not enough to just have a design thinking team.
Yeah.
It has to be embedded in the DNA of the company.
Everyone needs to be empowered to think creatively
Yes.
and solve problems. Well, we've covered so much in this deep dive.
We have.
I'm really struck by how relevant design thinking is to pretty much every aspect of our lives.
It is.
Whether we're designing a product, a service, a system, or just trying to solve everyday problems.
I agree. It's a really powerful set of tools and principles.
That can help us create a better world.
Yeah.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of design thinking.
It's been a pleasure.
And to you, dear listener, we leave you with this thought. How might you use these principles of empathy, innovation, and human-centered design to tackle the challenges you face in your own life? Keep those design thinking wheels turning.